Your early 20s feel like a time to stay safe and figure things out. But avoiding risk quietly trains your brain to fear uncertainty. The cost of that habit often appears years later. In your early 20s, avoiding risk often feels responsible. You keep a stable routine, avoid embarrassment, and wait until you feel ready. On the surface, it looks like maturity. In reality, it can quietly train your mind to fear uncertainty. Every time you choose comfort instead of challenge, your brain records the decision. It learns that safety is the priority and exploration is dangerous. This pattern becomes a habit long before you notice it. By the time real opportunities appear, hesitation already feels normal. What looked like patience slowly becomes psychological conditioning. You did not intend to become cautious, but repeated avoidance shapes the way you think about effort, failure, and possibility. During this decade, most people are supposed to test themselves. Careers start, skills develop, and confidence is built through action. When risk is constantly postponed, development slows down in ways that are not obvious at first. You may still work, study, and move through daily life, but you rarely push into uncomfortable territory. Without that pressure, your ability to adapt stays limited. The mind grows stronger when it handles uncertainty, criticism, and temporary failure. When those experiences are avoided, resilience does not develop. Years later, many people discover that their fear of change is stronger than their desire to improve. Another hidden cost is identity. In your 20s, you build a picture of who you are. That picture is shaped by the challenges you face and the responsibilities you accept. If most decisions are guided by safety, your identity slowly becomes smaller. You begin to see yourself as someone who waits, someone who prepares endlessly, someone who avoids situations where the outcome is uncertain. This self-image becomes powerful. Later, when a difficult opportunity appears, the mind resists it because it conflicts with the identity you practiced for. Years, the psychological effect compounds with time. Each year of avoidance reduces your tolerance for discomfort. Tasks that require courage start to look larger than they really are. Sending an application, starting a business idea, moving to a new city, or speaking up at work begins to feel like a major threat. Meanwhile, people who practiced risk earlier treat these actions as normal parts of growth. The gap between these two mindsets grows quietly. It is not about talent. It is about exposure to challenge. The early 20s are one of the few periods where mistakes are affordable and recovery time is long. Avoiding risk during this window creates a quiet regret that many people only recognize later. They realize they protected themselves from small failures, but also blocked the experiences that build capability. Confidence is rarely created by thinking. It is built through repeated contact with uncertainty. When that contact is missing, doubt fills the space. The real psychological cost is not the risks you take. It is the version of yourself that never develops because you kept choosing the safer path. Year after year, the mind becomes careful, slower, and less willing to test its own limits again. Avoiding risk in your early 20s also shapes the way you respond to responsibility. When a person repeatedly chooses the safest path, they often delay decisions that require commitment. This delay feels harmless at first. You tell yourself you are gathering information or waiting for a better moment. In reality, the habit of postponing difficult choices weakens decision-making ability. Strong decisions are built through practice. When you rarely force yourself to choose between uncertain outcomes, the mind becomes uncomfortable with pressure. Over time, even small decisions begin to feel heavier than they should. This psychological pattern affects work ethic as well. Hard work is not only about hours. It is about the willingness to enter situations where results are not guaranteed. Risk is present in almost every form of meaningful progress. Starting a new project, asking for responsibility, or learning a demanding skill all carry the possibility of failure. When someone becomes conditioned to avoid risk, they unconsciously avoid these growth areas too. They may stay busy with routine tasks that feel productive but require little courage. Activity replaces progress. The person remains occupied but not challenged. Another hidden effect appears in social comparison. During your 20s, you constantly observe what peers are doing with their lives. Some take chances with careers, businesses, or relocation. Others stay within predictable routines. Over time, the difference becomes visible. People who repeatedly faced uncertainty begin developing confidence that comes from experience. They become comfortable making decisions, handling criticism, and adjusting to change. Meanwhile, those who avoided risk may feel increasingly uncertain about their own direction. The comparison is not always external. It often happens quietly inside the mind. This internal comparison can slowly damage some. Most people have an internal sense of what they are capable of doing. When actions repeatedly fall below that potential, the mind notices the gap. You may continue to function normally, but a quiet frustration builds over time. It is not always loud or dramatic. It shows up as low motivation, hesitation, and a subtle feeling that you are behind where you should be. This feeling does not come from failure. It comes from knowing that certain risks were avoided again and again. The longer this pattern continues, the more difficult it becomes to reverse. Habits of safety become part of daily life. Friends, routines, and environments may all reinforce the same predictable path. At that point, change requires a much larger psychological effort than it would have earlier. A person must challenge not only fear of risk, but also the identity built around avoiding it. This is why the 20s matter so much. They shape how a person approaches uncertainty for the rest of adulthood. Risk during this decade does not mean reckless behavior. It means accepting that progress requires uncomfortable attempts, applying for positions that seem slightly out of reach, trying projects that may not succeed, entering rooms where you are not the most experienced person. These actions train the mind to function under uncertainty. Without them, the brain never develops the familiarity needed to stay calm when outcomes are unclear. That familiarity becomes one of the most valuable psychological advantages. Later in life, by the time a person reaches their late 20s, the psychological patterns formed earlier start producing visible results. The individuals who repeatedly exposed themselves to risk have usually built a tolerance for pressure. They have experienced rejection, uncertainty, and temporary failure enough times that these situations no longer feel overwhelming. Their decisions are faster because they have practiced making them. Their confidence is not based on optimism. It is based on familiarity with difficult situations. Those who avoided risk often experience the opposite. They may still have intelligence, potential, and ambition, but the lack of experience with uncertainty creates hesitation. Opportunities appear, yet the mind immediately focuses on the possible negative outcomes. Questions appear quickly. What if it fails? What if people judge the attempt? What if the situation becomes uncomfortable? These questions are natural, but without previous exposure to risk, the brain treats them as warning signals. Instead of normal parts of growth, this difference becomes especially clear in professional environments. Workplaces reward individuals who can move toward uncertainty and handle responsibility. Promotions, leadership roles, and new ventures usually require decisions without complete information. People who practiced risk earlier tend to approach these situations with calm attention. They understand that mistakes can be corrected and progress rarely follows a perfect plan. Those who avoided risk may wait for complete clarity before acting. Unfortunately, that clarity rarely arrives. The psychological cost also appears in motivation. When a person spends years protecting themselves from possible failure, their goals often become smaller. The mind begins to prioritize stability over progress. This shift can feel logical because safety offers immediate comfort. However, long-term satisfaction often depends on growth and capability. When growth slows, motivation slowly weakens. Work feels repetitive. Ambition becomes vague. The person is not exhausted from effort. They are limited by caution. Another important factor is regret. Regret does not always appear as a dramatic emotion. Often, it is quiet and reflective. A person begins to notice moments where action could have changed direction years earlier. They realize certain fears were exaggerated and certain opportunities were real. The realization is not about blaming the past. It is about recognizing that the cost of avoidance was larger than the cost of trying. The encouraging reality is that psychological patterns can still change. The brain remains adaptable throughout adulthood. However, changing the pattern requires conscious effort. It requires deliberately choosing situations that involve uncertainty. This may include learning demanding skills, accepting responsibility at work, starting projects without guaranteed results, or entering environments where you are not fully comfortable yet.